So let's welcome everybody. Just say hello. Hello.
Hello,
Hello.
All right. Hello, everybody.
Welcome to the Covenant Calendar Club. I want to give a special thank you, shout out to Charlene and to Tim. We are in the process of re-recording the event that we had this past Covenant Calendar Club meeting. We had some technical difficulties, and here they are on another day, early in the morning, ready to get this presentation up and running and posted for your convenience. Thank you for viewing. We pray that you are richly blessed by these teachings. And don't forget to like it and share it with whoever you feel led to share it with. So, Abba, Father, we do thank you and praise you for the opportunity to investigate your word. We pray, Father, that as we do, that it would become alive in us and that you would enable us to walk in it for the restoration of all things. And with that, we say amen. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn this presentation over. It looks like Charlene already has her screen up and running. And so we're just going to go ahead and get started. Here we go.
We're doing Grammar 101 Part 2, and probably every single study in calendar could be called Grammar 101 because we have to remember our grammar rules and our hermeneutics. But anyway, for the word evening, it's always the trickiest part of all the studies, and so that's why most of the studies in calendar will be focusing on the word evening. So we're just going to do a little update for the calendar study in this particular session. We will be looking at Grammar 101 Part 1, where we examined the first definitions for the word day, night, evening, morning, and twilight. I just want you to remember, if you can, what we did there. And then we also started to examine the second definition for evening. We didn't get all the way through, but we'll be continuing that today. We also looked at the unleavened bread consumption schedule PowerPoint the week before, and we had a very close examination of how evening affects the number of days for consuming unleavened bread. It isn't 6 days, it isn't 7 days, but it is a full 8 days. So we'll just be looking at that a little tiny bit. The study today, we are going to do the definitions for morning and night, and we will complete the rest of the definitions for the word day. And then we are going to review a little bit of the Grammar 101, Part 1, that we did 2 weeks ago so that you can remember, and we will do a little bit of review on the unleavened bread consumption so that you can remember. And then at the end, we are going to do a further examination of the word evening in the Gospels. This is going to be really interesting to see what happens with the word evening in the Gospels. So you might be wondering why there is so much emphasis on evening in the Covenant Calendar study, and the reason is the word evening is the trickiest and the most challenging term to understand correctly. You'll find this first mentioned in Genesis 1:5. It is mentioned before the word morning. This is where the study has to be understood. And this is where the problem is with our Messianics and our Hebrew roots and many of our feast-keeping friends. If they would just do a study on the word evening, they would realize that sunset does not begin Yahuwah's day. So with that little introduction, we will look at the definitions for morning and night as they are given in the creation week, and then we're going to do a little comparison outside of the creation week. The word morning, as it's found in Genesis 1:5, is numbered 1242. It is boker, and when you look up the definition, it's dawn or the break of day. Very, very simple. When we look up the word night in Genesis 1:5, it is 3915, Lael. This is a twist away of the light. This is not to be confused with darkness, which is found in Genesis 1:2. Darkness in Genesis 1:2 and night here in Genesis 1:5 are completely different terms. So in Genesis 1, both morning and night have basically just one definition each. We're not looking at a whole a list of definitions like we had with the word evening. We will just continue on and look at some alternate definitions that are used for morning and night. And this is after the creation week. I found this really interesting when I went snooping around, looked up the word night in the Strong's Concordance, and I found that it is also listed with 6153, which is a rev, or that number and a rev connect to the word evening. But you will find night in these 4 verses. There might have been a few more, but these 4 for sure. So there's one in Genesis 49, Leviticus 6:20, and Job 7:4, and Psalms 30 verse 5, where the night is used as the word evening. So I know that evening has the last definition as night, so this must be when the evening joins up with the night. Found that very interesting. You can look those up. I also went to check and see if there were other definitions for the word morning that you will find after Genesis 1. And there was. So let's do a little bit more on the word morning. You will find the word morning as 7836. This is the word shakar. And it also has the same definition as boker. It's dawn, break of day. This is in Genesis 19:15, where Lot is ushered out of Sodom with his family. We did have a little bit of discussion last week about shakar and boker, so hopefully this clears things up. Also, the word morning, you will find it listed as 216, which is or in Hebrew. And this was found in Nehemiah 8:3, where the context for morning or is light to the noon hour. Found that very interesting. But 216 shows up for the very first time in Genesis 1:3, when Yahuwah said, "Let there be light, let there be or." So this is 216. It's first defined in the creation week as light for the 12-hour day season. But what I'm finding here in Nehemiah is that or can also mean light to the noon hour. So that's taking in your full morning hours. And we need to remember that there was no twilight on the first day of creation. When Yahuwah spoke, he said, "Let there be light." He did not start the first day with a twilight. Twilights happen ever after that. And the first twilight was the evening twilight on day 1. So that's just a little bit of review for morning and night. And we will now continue with day definitions. There's more than just one. I'll just do a review here for day. It's word number 3117, or yom. And the very first definition that is listed is the 12-hour day season. It's from an unused root, meaning to be hot, a day as the warm hours, whether literal. And then Mr. Strong says from sunrise to sunset. But we are going to challenge that. I'm saying that because Strong's has given us very good definitions for the word evening and morning, Mr. Strong should have said, instead of sunrise to sunset, he should have said from dawn to dusk. This would have been according to the Hebrew definitions for morning and evening. And I really do believe that he just kind of got caught in the trap of tradition with the Jews and put sunrise to sunset there. So you will find errors in the Strong's. He's not error-free, but this is where you find it when you do a full study on these words. The second definition, excuse me, that he lists for the word day is the 24-hour cycle, including the day season and the night season. The first definition was 12 hours. The second one is 24. And then he goes on to say, or from one sunset to the next. I have crossed it out because that is not true. It is not when the day begins. We've already figured that one out. So Strong's is incorrect in calculating the commencement of the day with sunset. He should have said from one daybreak to the next. And our friends that are honoring sunset, I'm just sure that when they go look up the word day for Genesis 1 and they read Strong's definitions, they see sunrise to sunset or one sunset to the next. They are just automatically just hooked in. You've got two witnesses, so the day starts at sunset. The trouble is, everybody, they did not look at the word evening well enough. Third definition that Mr. Strong's lists, where one day equals 1 year, like in a prophetic sense. It's figurative. That's going to deal with prophecy, the timelines in prophecy where basically 1260 days would equal 1260 years. Now those are the first three definitions that you'll find there. And there's a host of other definitions for the word day, like the day of his coming, the days of their lives. I have not listed them because they do not apply to the creation week and especially the first day of creation. So the first usage of a word in the scriptures most often takes the first definition. This is one of those hermeneutic rules or principles. So the very first time that you see a word in the scriptures and you look at the very first definition, and we learned this about how to use a dictionary, generally, and I'm going to say probably 99% of the time, the very first definition is the one that applies to that verse. It's also the backbone. You can further your study to take the definition of the word from the very last usage, let's say in the Old Testament. That is your backbone structure. So this is a rule that we are wanting to remember for Grammar 101. Let's just look at some points for light or for day. The very first time it's used is in Genesis 1:5. It's the first part of the verse. The first definition for day is the warm hours or the 12 hours of the day. That is exactly what Yahuwah is talking about when he says, and the light he calls day. This is talking about the 12-hour day season. The second use of day, you find that in the second part of Genesis 1:5, and that is now going to align with the two twilights, linking them to the day season. We said that the twilights have light from the sun, even though the sun is not above the horizon, and that light is connected to the day season. When we're looking at the terms evening and morning, the very first usage of evening and morning is in the last part of Genesis 1:5. It is given after the day season has already been determined and defined. These are definitions in verse 5. I never understood this before, but what Yahuwah is doing is he is defining the terms day, night, evening, and morning, and he's telling you what they mean so that you can understand his calendar. The very first definition for evening and for morning is correct. The first definition for evening is dusk, and the first definition for morning is dawn. That is correct. And both of these terms are twilights. They have light connected with them. So because they have light, that means the evening twilight and the morning twilight, they both belong to the day season because they have light. And we'll chart this information here in a bit. I just want to make a little extra comment here. There's a lot of calendars a lot of feast keepers that have been calculating their calendars from the equinox that are now switching to calculate their feast calendars to equilux instead of equinox. Equilux, according to what you'll find on the internet, they say it's equal day and night, but it is not. They are doing equal sunrise and equal sunset. So what they're looking for in equinox is for sunset time to be 6:22 in the morning, sunset time to be 6:22 in the evening. And they are saying that's equal day and night. That is not equal day and night because you have twilights that have not been taken into consideration. It's really easy to do a 15-minute check on the computer. Check places like Inuvik, Anchorage, Mexico City, Norway, Panama. I did South Africa. You can do Australia. And I did equilux for about 8 different places. And I had equilux times from March the 5th all the way to March 23rd. And that was not taking into consideration the twilights. So equilux does not work at all. Let's chart what happens with this Genesis 1:5 because these are definitions for these terms. In the first part of Genesis 1:5, the very first, it tells you that there's 2 major divisions to divide the 24-hour cycle in half. You have 12 hours of the day. That's where Yahuwah says the light is called day, and 12 hours of night. He gives you the definition. He says the darkness is called night. And notice everything about the creation week starts right up here with the light. Right here, light, no twilight, light came first. Then he goes on to talk about the smaller components of the day in the last half of the verse, where he says, and the evening and the morning are the first day. These twilight components are just small slivers of transition between light and night. So the evening twilight, it is placed 12 hours after the day, and we have our morning twilight placed 12 hours after the night. These are definitions. This is not telling you when the day begins. They're definitions of where evening and morning twilight belong. Had a lot of people say, if the day starts in the morning, why does it say evening first? Last part of Genesis 1:5 is not a statement of when the day begins. They are statements of where the twilights belong. So what I can say is that Yahuwah has the wording in the correct order. Starts with the day, then the evening arrives next. You have your full night, and then the morning comes along. It separates the old day, begins the new day. So the order is 100% correct. Light came first. It is called day. Then you have your evening twilight following, and your night follows your evening. And then after your evening, you have your morning twilight, which, as I said, ends the first day and it begins the second day. So in modern terms, Genesis 1:5, the last part of it, would read this way. This is the way I would like to read it. And the dusk twilight and the dawn twilight belong to the day, the hot part of the 12-hour day season. That's the way I like to see it read according to the definitions of the Hebrew. We just like to do a little comparison of night to twilight. We have our evening and our morning twilight. We have discovered that night is an absence of light. There is no light from the sun. I should have from the sun because there are little twinkly lights from the stars. But night is the absence of sunlight. But twilight does contain light from the sun. And that is exactly why twilights are reckoned as part of the day or part of the day season. And that is actually pretty simple when you just look at the definitions. And by the way, we have a little puppy dog in this, a little sleeping puppy dog in this series. So when you see our puppy dog, we're changing horses midstream and we're going to another topic. So just prepare to switch gears here. Okay. So I'd like to do a little bit of a review from the last 2 weeks since we finished off our morning and night definitions and Genesis 1:5. Our first review that we're going to look at is from the consumption of the unleavened bread in the week of the Passover festival. We'll do a little bit of a review on that. And then we're going to, after that, do a little review from Grammar 101 Part 1 that we did 2 weeks ago. We had evening definitions, and we were looking at a qualifier in the Tanakh where things looked like they were a little tricky. And after we've done that review, then we're ready to go into the second part of our study today with the word evening and Aibv, because that is the word that is still under investigation. And like I said before, this is the word that has to be understood in every single calendar study. We are going to compare some dictionary definitions of Aibv in Hebrew and in Greek. And I like to just think that sometimes we need a really good motivational boot when it comes to studying calendar, because it is really controversial and it is tricky. But the result is that when you find a new discovery for Aibv, or you understand the great importance of this twilight in the whole component of the 24-hour cycle, every calendar piece of information in the scriptures is just going to open up. It's just all the pieces are going to start to fit in. So just pull the cord if you need an extra motivational boot, is what I say. So we're doing a little review here with our unleavened bread, and Tim is going to help us with the next couple of slides, because this was his teaching on understanding Aibv in the unleavened bread conception study. Now what I have here is I have unleavened bread number 1. This is review. When we come to number 2, we have added some new slides that we would like to explain for some of the audience that had some difficulty. So I'm turning the mic over to Tim.
Okay. Understanding Aibv. Aibv, evening. To mix, mingle, mixed multitude, to be darkened, duskily obscured, or ben ha-arba'im, between the evenings, which is more literally between the mixtures. And those mixtures are what makes up the twilights before sunrise and after sunset. And this is taken
excellent.
This is taken from the Hebrew lexicon of John Parkhurst. You'll notice the date, it's 1762, and this particular lexicon does not use the Masoretic vowel points.
And in our picture, we have a picture of evening or Aibv, which nicely demonstrates that there is light in the sky. And for those that are new to this, I'd just like you to take note that when the sun does set in your area, just take note how long you actually have light in the sky before it becomes pitch dark. This light is Aibv. This is twilight. This is still part of the day season.
Now,
This is the second. Yeah, go ahead.
If you didn't call it what it was and people didn't know, you could think that you'd be looking the opposite direction in the morning and call it a sunrise. I mean,
Yes.
they both look very similar. So I just thought I'd mention that. We knew it was sunset because you told us so, but it could have easily been the other direction in the morning at sunrise.
Yes, just as easily it could be sunrise.
Yes, although I've sort of noticed that usually the sunrise is more pinkish in the sky and sunset seems to be more of the orange. Not 100%, but you know, if you look at pictures on the internet for twilights, you don't really know unless they tell you this is a sunset picture. But anyway, the twilights are beautiful. Almost the most beautiful part of the whole day. Just gorgeous, gorgeous artwork out there by the creator.
Amen.
So on this slide, this is a a second that we wanted to add this new slide in for clarification. So I'm just going to let Tim go ahead and just tell us whatever he wants about this slide.
Aibv is most often a verb. Not always, but most often. There are many definitions for Aibv, and they are descriptive action words. Boker, morning, which is a noun, identifies a general portion of the light season. Again, a noun. Also known as shachar, and that is dawn's light. Aibv, when it is applied to morning, boker, describes the mixing, the action verb of light and darkness occurring in the sky at that particular time. And Aibv, the word Aibv can be applied to many different things, to cake mixtures, to people, to like crowds of people, to all kinds of different substances. But when it is applied to time, the mixture of light and darkness mixing makes up the twilights.
Mm-hmm. That's good. So Aibv could apply to braiding your hair, mixing strands of hair, or to your warp and your woof when you're weaving. So it's the mixing action. It's an action word. So we had some difficulties last week, when we used the word Aibv in the morning twilight, when most of us were saying, no, it's supposed to be evening, but we're talking about the mixing action, not the evening, which would be a noun. Evening is a noun, but Aibv can be a noun or it can be a verb. Okay, Tim?
Nouns and verbs. We're waiting for the screen to come up here. Working together. Okay, there on your left is boker or shachar. That is dawn's first light. And we see the gray box. It is the morning action described as Aibv, the twilight mixture. And that comes before the sunrise. Once the sunrise happens, then we have direct sunlight throughout the full light season. Then comes our sunset, and the direct sunlight is removed, and the evening Aibv twilight mixture occurs, and that is the darkness begins to mix with the residual light from after sunset. Then we go through the darkness of the night season, and again comes boker. At dawn, a new cycle begins, and that starts the 24-hour process all over once again.
Mm-hmm. So what Tim is saying is that this twilight in the morning and this twilight in the evening, this is the verb. These are the mixings. But this evening section here is actually the noun. Is that what you would agree with, Tim?
Yes, that could be a descriptive noun for it, yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is a new slide as well from last week. So now we're going to go into our review from Grammar 101 that we did 2 weeks ago, and then we will continue on with part 2 today. I want you to remember that we examined only the first definitions for day, night, evening, morning, and twilight. And then we started to examine the second definition for evening, and we're going to do a little review there and then continue on with the rest of the second definitions, third and fourth definitions for evening. Our first definition for evening in the Strong's Concordance, he says, is a mixing of light and night or a dusk twilight. He lists the word dusk. Dusk is written as the first definition. There is also a second definition in the Strong's listed as the word day. 6153 is listed as day. At this point, we decided to question why the word day is ever listed as a definition, when it doesn't seem like it has anything to do with evening as a noun or evening as a verb. So yes, asking the question why is a really good thing to do, because we had determined that Aibv is defined as a mixing of light and night, and we did not understand how the word day could have any kind of a mixing part to it. So that is something that we need to question. And coming up, we are going to do an examination of the word day as it's defined by evening in the Hebrew. We'll do that in the Hebrew, and we'll take a peek into the New Testament as well. Strong's also has listed a third and fourth definition for the word evening. The third definition is even or evening or eventide. Eventide is basically an Old English term, and it means the same as dusk or twilight. So as far as I'm concerned, it's not really a new definition or a different one. It's just using a different type of a word. He lists the first definition as dusk. This one is eventide, but it basically is dusk. And then he has a fourth definition of night, 6153. Remember, I already showed you 4 scriptures where the word night is listed as 6153 instead of as Lael. Just want to note here that sunset or shemesh bo in the Hebrew is not one of the definitions for evening or Aibv. Sunset is just a point of time that ushers in Aibv. Once you have a sunset, then you will have an Aibv in the evening, okay? The other thing is that on the first 3 days of creation, there was no sunset to start the day or end the day. So sunset is not part of the definition for Aibv. I just wanted to do a little bit of work here that we did not do last week. The word sun, when you look it up in the Hebrew, is 8121. It's shemesh, and it means to be brilliant, the sun. When you look up the terms going down, it is 935, and it is bo. This is a primitive root, but it means 2 things. It can mean to go, like to come up, or to go down, to go or to come. Remember, the word evening is not the same as sunset. 6153 are not family words with 8121 or 935. So the word evening has nothing to do with the word sunset. They're not related in phonetics. They're not related in word numbers, in family word numbers. They're not related at all. Sunset is shemesh bo. It has nothing to do with meaning evening or meaning when the day starts. I'm just wondering if there's any comments from Mario or from Tim.
I think that that is an interesting observation, you know, one that we should consider when we read all the time. I know that there have been a lot of students now that are looking into the Hebrew and the Greek, and just noticing that we can see if something's related by the number itself. If it's too big of a spread, it's not even in the same ballpark. And then there's that ability to tie in something phonetically. Now those are 2 good observations that we might want to keep in the back of our head when looking at words.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and also another part, we'll do this here in a little bit, is that sometimes when words rhyme, like tohu and bohu, they will have similar meanings as well. We have none of these points coming up with evening and sunset in the Hebrew or in the English. Sunset is just not part of it. Moses got it right. He did not write shemesh bo on the first day of creation or anywhere in the Torah. Shemesh bo is not part of when the day begins. So we have discovered that evening, or Aibv, rightly claims the first definition as dusk. This is the mixing of light and night, and I have not done an inventory of all of the Aibvs in the Old Testament, to see how many times it takes up this dusk definition, but I'm going to say probably 97% of the time evening will take up the dusk definition. But evening can only claim the second definition for the word day, where there is no mixing, when it is linked to a qualifier. We did this work 2 weeks ago. We're just going to review this qualifier here. What in the world does it mean to have a qualifier? We took our first example from Torah. It was about the quail in Exodus 16. We are going to do that review today with Tim. But I just want to say, in this study, when you see leavened bread and unleavened bread here on the picture, this means it is a tricky question. When you do a study for bread in the Greek to try to figure out if Yeshua had leavened bread or unleavened bread at his Last Supper with his disciples, the Last Supper he ate with them, it's a tricky question. You cannot understand it unless you take your types and your antitypes back to the Hebrew to understand what kind of bread it was. So this is this kind of a tricky question. Okay, Tim, we will let you do this little study here on the quail as a review.
The Quail of Exodus 16. And it came to be, that shows a transitional period, that quails come up at evening, H 6153, is that dusk, and covered the camp. Now we know that the quails come in, or all birds, when it comes up too close to sunset, they come in looking for a place to roost for the night. They are coming for rest just before the sunset. If we look at the location of the Aibv, on the left-hand side of your screen, you're going to see a pre-sunrise twilight mixture, and that is one single Aibv mixture. That's where your light and your darkness are still doing the mixing before the sunrise. If you look at the right side of your box, you're going to see post-sunset, and this is the second Aibv mixture of the 24-hour period. And it is this Aibv mixture that the quails were about to arrive just before this mixture, before the sunset. Go ahead, change it.
Okay, well, yep.
It's waiting for, there it comes. Aibv and Aibv are family words, and if you will note from previous studies that the word Aibv is what is exactly the same letters as Aibv. And Aibv is the plural. That means there's two twilight mixtures. And once again, you'll see on the left side, the first twilight mixture is pre-sunrise. That's your gray box there, where the light mixture and darkness mixture are occurring before the sunrise. And once again, on the right side is the post-sunset Aibv mixture. After your sun goes down, then the darkness can begin to mix with the residual light from the sun. So it is close to the sunset that the quail are coming in to land to roost for the night. And that is where the question says, at which Aibv do the quails arrive? The quails do not come in to roost in the morning. The quails come in to rest and relax for the night, just as the sunset is about to occur. And it is this Aibv where the quails arrived that the Israelites were going to eat.
Mm-hmm. We'll just continue on.
The Hebrew phrase ben ha-arba'im only means one thing. Between the light and darkness mixtures cannot mean after sunset or before sunrise. Between means after the sunrise and before sunset. Do the quail arrive ben ha-arba'im, or between the twilight mixtures?
Yes.
Yeah, they do. Just waiting for the next slide to come up.
So what you're saying is that between actually means between?
Yes. Yeah, after sunrise and before sunset. There's no other way. It has to be between, in between those. The quail's qualifying statement is Exodus 16:12. Once again, this is the qualifier. This is what allows us to have the definition of day for Aibv. Exodus 16:12. I have heard the grumblings of the children of Israel. Speak to them, saying, between the evenings, that is between sunrise and sunset, you are to eat meat. And verse 13, and it came to be that quails come up at evening, that's H6153, before sunset to dusk, and covered the camp. So here you see the qualifier between the evenings, and it is in direct relation to the word Aibv, when the quails come up. So because the term between the evenings qualifies when the quails come up, and they're to be eating the quails at evening, or the quails come in at evening, I should say, that is what allows us to recognize the definition of day for the term Aibv. The quails roost in the evening, and verse 12 is qualifying the quail arrived before sunset. The people were eating the meat between the two mixings. Therefore, the evening of the verse 13 connects to the day definition, likely just prior to sunset.
Yes, and this was something new that we understood doing these studies. This is brand new. We did not understand this a couple of years ago. We have not had opportunity at this point in time to see if there's any other examples in the Old Testament where there would be a qualifier for the word evening. So that's some homework for those that would like to investigate it. But we're finding that that the scriptures will be clear if you do your search. It will always show you what exactly it's talking about. We'll see that in the gospel account a little bit later on. So the word evening in the Strong's definitions has these opposites. The second definition says day, and the fourth definition says night. These are definitely opposites, but we want to note that the second definition for evening can be used to mean any part of the day season after sunrise to sunset, only if there is a qualifying phrase that says between the evenings, that's your ben ha-arba'im, that phrase has to be present in order for evening to have this day definition. But there's also a second time that evening can mean day, and that is if there is a divine intervention. This is brand new that we'll be showing a little bit later on. So there's two ifs about this day definition. Evening never, ever takes the definition of afternoon time without a qualifying verse. You will not, I have not found it, so there's some homework as well. We also did a little bit of work in the Grammar 101 2 weeks ago on the word afternoon. I looked it up. It's 5186. It's nata. And guess what? Afternoon is used only one time in the King James Version. And it's 5186. There's the verse in Judges 19, verse 8, where they tarried until afternoon and they did eat. So the question is this afternoon considered an evening? That is what our question is. Well, I gave you the definitions for the word afternoon. I don't know if you remember or not, but it was almost 3/4 of a slide. I'm just choosing a few of the definitions for a review today. This is the afternoon shadows as they begin to stretch and spread out, to bend away, to bow down, to decline, to go, stretching forth. You'll notice in the later, as the afternoon gets later and later, your shadows get longer and longer. They spread out, they bend away, and they go down when the sun begins to pass the meridian at the noon hour, until the shadows are overtaken by dusk. Lots and lots of definitions for the word afternoon. This is also part of the Grammar 101, these rules that we want to remember. Afternoon is 5186. We're comparing it to 6153 evening. And I'm saying in Hebrew, these words are not related at all. They are not related through a similar Hebrew root. These words are very different. They do not go back to a family root word. So no relationship there at all between afternoon and evening. They are definitely not related through phonetics in Hebrew. One is nata and evening is erev. No relationship like tohu and bohu that you'll find in Genesis 1:2. And they are definitely not related through their first definitions. Afternoon is afternoon, and for evening, dusk is dusk. So there was no relation that evening was taking on a definition of afternoon. And our puppy dog says that we're going to be going to the second part of our study. This is the new part of our study today. Still working on evening. And maybe there's going to have to be a quiz about this when we get all done. Evening part 2. Malachi 3:6 is a very important verse. I hope none of us ever forget it. It says, "For I, Yahuwah, I do not change." So we're going to be doing a comparison of definitions for evening. We're going to look at the Hebrew and the Greek, and we're asking the question, is there going to be any conflicts whatsoever with the comparison between evening used as dusk, or is there going to be a conflict with the evening mixings found during the day hours? Remember, we had this little conflict, it looked like it, with the quail in Exodus 16. So we're asking a question, is there going to be any conflicts in the New Testament or even in the Old? We're just moving on now, just a little bit about the Greek scriptures, just as some information, because you'll need to have this as we go through. I have found that when I'm working with Greek scriptures and definitions for Greek words, it gets tricky and complicated really quick. And for clarity, I've had to take these definitions back to the Hebrew to understand. I don't know a lot about Hebrew, and I don't know a lot about, I don't know a lot about Greek, and I'm learning about Hebrew, but what I'm finding is that Greek is a lot more difficult to work with. I don't like it. It's not fun. It's a hard work. But for the word evening in the Greek, we need to be extremely careful. Remember I told you about the word artos for bread? That was tricky enough. This one gets a little more tricky because we need to consider context and a variety of Greek word numbers. We're going to be looking at the example of Joseph of Arimathea when he's requesting Yahushua's body, and we're going to search for a qualifying verse to see if we understand correctly what's happening in the New Testament for the gospel, the Passion account. And I want to make a note here. You might not understand this statement right now, but you will eventually. The gospel account absolutely cannot be understood. Let me clarify this. The gospel Passion account of Yeshua's last moments of his life on this earth, when he's from Gethsemane to Pilate's Hall to the cross. What do we have? Gethsemane, Gabbatha, and Golgotha. You cannot understand the Passion account if you don't understand Genesis chapter 1, especially the first day. You cannot understand it if you do not understand Exodus 12 about the Passover lamb and the types and antitypes that are there. And you need to understand Exodus 16, where we need to have qualifiers to understand how to figure out this tricky puzzle. So as we go through the studies, throughout the coming weeks and get up to the Gospels, then you'll be able to put the pieces together. So what we're saying here, we're asking questions. What does it mean to have a qualifier for even and evening in the Greek? Our second
comment also?
example, we're going to be, yes.
Yeah, Charlene, when you're saying that we have to go on your last slide there, when you have to understand Genesis and Exodus first before we can understand about the crucifixion and the Passion Week and that, does that tie in with Isaiah when he has told us 7 times that we must know the beginning so that we can understand the ending, the rest of the scripture? Can we tie that in there?
Well, I think you can tie it in very, very nicely, because Isaiah didn't give us that qualification just one time. He told us 7 times, and also it's between chapters 40 and 48. Isaiah has a lot of chapters in his book, but between chapters 40 and 48, he has told us 7 times. So if you're reading his book, you're going to get a good dose of it, that he's saying you can know the end from the beginning. We know that there is a lot that are understanding the cross was on a Friday. If you understand Genesis 1 and Exodus 12 and Daniel 9:27 and some of these other verses, you will know that the cross was not on a Friday. You will, if you know Genesis 1, you will know that that sunset did not begin the day. You're just going to know a whole lot of things. So Genesis 1, Exodus 12 are absolutely crucial to be understood. And that's a fun part. We're going to do this today, a little bit later on. It's really, really, to me, exciting when the cross has the last word. Yes, you can say, yes, the beginning was great, but when you see the calendar come together in the last moments of Yeshua's life, his ministry, he has not said one word. It's all through his actions. And I'm saying the last word is in the cross. That is your strongest witness, is in the Messiah. Trust me, that is a brownie point to know that you have the true Messiah. So Joseph's request for the body of Yeshua, we're going to be asking, was Joseph's timed request late in the afternoon, like the evening part before the sunset? Or was Joseph's request for the evening after the sunset? And don't forget, I've got my bread here to remind you that this is a tricky question. What I found when we looked into the Greek scriptures for the word evening, it was a little bit of a shock, because there are 2 different numbers for the word evening, 2 different Greek numbers. There are 15 New Testament verses, and I have them listed here, for the word 3798. And all of these verses here are using the words either even, evening, or eventide. There are 3 New Testament verses that use another word for the word evening. It's 2073. But these verses here in Luke and Acts are using the words evening and eventide. They do not use the word even. And we're going to look at 2073 first. We're going to be comparing 2073 and 3798. And don't ask me why Greek had to have 2 words for this one word evening, but they do. So in 2073 in the Greek, evening is the only definition. There is nothing else. It's hespera. It says feminine. Now look here. It says as an adjective. Found that kind of interesting. The first definition is evening. Then it says the eve. It can be implied as an hour. And there it has eventide. That is very clear. Evening, that's it. I also took a little look in the Thayer's Greek lexicon to see if there was anything else that I could find, and it also just has first definition of evening. There was nothing new there. But for 3798 in the Greek, afternoon definition is listed before the evening definition in the Strong's. It's opsius. It's from 3796, which means late in the day, feminine as a noun. I have not been able to break this open yet, but this evening is used as a noun. 2073 appears to be used as an adjective. Now this is where you'd have to go into your verses and see if 2703 is always an adjective. I have not done that. But the interesting part to me was that 3798 has the very first definition as afternoon in the Greek. And the second definition for evening is nightfall. And then by and by, they finally give the third definition as evening. I found that very interesting. When I looked into the Thayer's Greek lexicon for 3798, it just says late. But now it says as an adjective, which was interesting because we had the adjective up here in 2073. So there's something going on there. I'm not sure what it is. So our question needs to be, which definition is going to apply to Joseph when he asks for the body of Yahusha at the evening? Is it going to be 2073 or 3798? Would that help us at all in our search? There's a really important note for 3798. I'm doing a review here just so that you remember. 3798, the afternoon definition is listed way before the evening definition. It says it's from 3798, late in the day. 3798, it did say, by extension, after the close of the day, okay? It's coming from that root word. First definition was afternoon. That still puzzles me, everyone. The second one was nightfall. That puzzles me even more. And finally, the third definition was even, evening, or eventide. Now, I want you to remember that there are 15 New Testament verses that use 3798. But remember, they're only using the words even, evening, and eventide. They do not use the words afternoon or nightfall. They only use these three words. Not one of them uses afternoon or nightfall. And that's a question to me. There's the scriptures if you want to look them up. I also looked in the King James Version for the word afternoon and to see if there was a Greek word number for that. But afternoon is not even found in the King James Version of the scriptures. No afternoon at all. So when I found that, I thought, okay, so they just put afternoon here. They hooked it into 3798 for evening, but why they listed it as the first definition, I don't know yet. But there are some scriptures in the New Testament that definitely do speak of afternoon. And these are all scriptures that have the word hour connected to them. I'll start with the 6th hour, or that would be at noon most often. We have scriptures that have Matthew and Mark and Luke. These are all about the darkness at the cross at the 6th hour. There's a scripture that talks about the 6th hour on John 4 verse 6 and Acts 10:19. You can see I have crossed out John 19:14. We're going to look at this verse right now. All of these others, at least the top 3, are talking about darkness at the cross. John 19:14 says this, and it was the preparation of the Passover, and about the 6th hour, And Pilate saith unto the Jews, Behold your king. When you compare this verse for the 6th hour with Matthew, Mark, and Luke, you will find that Matthew, Mark, and Luke are talking about dawn timing. They're saying that the 6th hour was when Yeshua was on the cross and it became dark. That is the 6th hour counting from dawn. But John has the 6th hour. He's got Yeshua standing before Pilate. And that is not at noon. So John 19:14 was crossed out for a very special reason. Yes, this verse does mention the 6th hour, and it was the time that Yeshua was standing before Pilate after a night of interrogation. And I want you to know right here up front, this is one of our hermeneutic rules. John does not use the dawn day reckoning of time only for the verses of the Passion account. He's using Roman reckoning of time that begins the day at midnight, just like Rome does today. So 6 hours from midnight is going to be about 6 o'clock in the morning, the way we reckon time according to Rome, or it's dawn, about the 1st hour of the day. Another thing I want you to remember is that John does use the dawn day reckoning of time for everywhere else in his book, not for the Passion account.
So let me make sure that
It'll take quite a bit of time to figure that out if you do.
Let me make sure that I get this right in my understanding. So there were two different reckoning of time, as opposed to like on your watch what time it is. And there were also different reckonings of days depending on what calendar you were finding. During that era, that period, there was more than one time clock and more than one calendar going on at the same time. Is that true?
Yes. Yes, and John was using the Roman reckoning time for the Passion account, and the concept of Roman reckoning time is documented fully in the Messianic Testament or the New Testament. That is the scriptural foundation for Roman reckoning. It's written right in there, and that is how we understand that John can use this timing system when he was writing to Roman people. I believe it was in Antioch that he was living, and he was trying to get through to these people in a language that they understood. They understood that their days started at midnight, same as the civil time does today. And he was trying to get through to them this message about the timing of the Passion Week, and therefore he wrote to them in Roman reckoning time, and so that the 6th hour, when Yahushua was standing with Pilate just before he was sentenced at dawn, that is why it is called the 6th hour, because it's 6 hours from midnight to dawn. That is Roman reckoning time.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and the other thing too is that the Gospel of John, as I understand it, was the last book of the New Testament that was written, and it was written approximately 30 years after Matthew, Mark, and Luke. John had a very, very special gift. He could look at the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke and decide, you know what, they missed this or they missed that. And so John, in his book, clarifies these really tricky problems, and the bread is one of them. He's writing 30 years after. He's realizing that the gospel of the true Messiah, his crucifixion, and just who he was, had to get to the whole world. The world was basically speaking Greek at that point in time. They were on the Roman reckoning of time, and he knew that if the world was going to understand who the true Messiah was, he had to speak to them under their terms of their timing and whatnot, so that they could say, yes, that was the true Messiah. John's book is very interesting.
Well, that makes sense, because if you spoke to me in another language, I probably wouldn't get it, because I only speak, unfortunately, one. Unlike many countries, people speak 3 and 4 and 5, then that's common. But yeah, so he would had a concern to make sure that things were being communicated clearly to the people that spoke that at that time.
It's kind of interesting because John is considered a book that speaks different than the rest of them. And for some reason, people want to call it a very controversial book because it is so different. But if you understand John correctly, he actually pulls the 3 Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke together and just makes a beautiful picture out of all of them. They all correlate perfectly together. And if you understand John correctly, according to the scripture example, that is how he pulls them all together.
Very good. Great observation.
Yes. Yes. And if you want to understand calendar, you'll find out really quick that John is the one that has the questions, or the answers, I should say, for the tricky questions. It's in John. Most people don't know. We've learned all this the hard way. But let's just continue looking at some verses that would be considered in the afternoon. The 7th hour, which would be 1 p.m. Roman time, this is found in John chapter 4:52. And it's about Yahusha meeting the woman at the well, and he asked for a drink at the 7th hour, and that is definitely afternoon. This is one of those verses where I'm telling you that John is using the dawn reckoning of time. He uses dawn reckoning of time all the way through his book until he gets to the Passion. Then he's working with Roman time. And when you know that, you'll be able to settle a lot of problems. There is another phrase that's called the 9th hour, and that's approximately 3 p.m. Roman time. This particular term, the 9th hour, is going to align with between the evenings, or between those mixings of the dawn twilight and the evening twilight. And of course the cross is between the sunrise and the sunset. We understand the cross where Yahusha died was approximately 3 p.m. Passover dusk in Jerusalem is a few minutes after 6 o'clock in the afternoon, or around 6:20, somewhere in there, or the 12th hour, and then night follows shortly after. So pay attention to the gospel examples that I have there if you want to look them up. There's another term, it's called the 11th hour, and that would be about 5 p.m. Roman time. Remember, that's about the parable of the workers in the vineyard, where the master was calling people to work to his vineyard at the last hour of the day. It's recorded in Matthew 20, and it's the 11th hour. I also went to check and see. Not one of these hour verses is linked to 3798 as defined as evening or eventide. No linkage there whatsoever. Completely different. So the verses that are considered afternoon are completely different. We're going to move on now into the tricky part of the study, because you're seeing the bread, all right? This is about Joseph's request. He's requesting Yahusha's body. It says at even, and we're asking the question, what time frame is that? Is it number 1? Is he asking for the even timing that is between the mixings, which is after sunrise and before sunset? Is he asking, or I'm going to say in the afternoon before sunset? Or is Joseph asking with the even timing that is only after sunset? And we're going to examine some scriptures to see if there's a reasonable solution. Many want to have Joseph asking for the body in the late afternoon because they want to get the body of Yahusha into the grave before sunset, before their Sabbath starts. And so they will say that that even is basically before sunset. But is it? That's what we're asking. Let's look and see what Matthew records for Joseph's request. This is from the King James. It says, and when the even, this is 3798. Remember, the first definition was afternoon. When the even was come, there came a rich man of Arimathea named Joseph, who also himself was one of Yahusha's disciples. He went to Pilate and he begged the body of Yahusha. And then Pilate commanded the body to be delivered. And just in case you've forgotten, I'm reminding you that Strong's Evening 3798 is late in the day, has the very first definition listed as afternoon. So if we took the very first definition that Strong's lists, that's afternoon, does it sound like Joseph is asking for Yahusha's body before sunset? And did he really do that or not? Want to know? It sounds like he asked for the body before sunset. Well, let's look at Joseph's request in the book of Mark. And I just want to note here that Mark is a very interesting book as well. He has some peculiar things that always seem to break another part of the puzzle. Mark 15, it says this, "And now when the even was come," he's using the very same word number in Greek, 3798. "When the even was come, because it was the preparation," that is, the day before the Sabbath. I'm putting in high Sabbath because John tells you it was high Sabbath. This is the day before the high Sabbath. "Joseph of Arimathea went in boldly unto Pilate, and he craved the body of Yahusha." Okay, so the reading in Mark is still providing the possibility that Joseph asked for the body in the late afternoon. Because remember, 3798's very first definition is listed as afternoon. Well, did Joseph do that? Well, it looks like it's afternoon. But is there a qualifying verse? Remember, we were talking about a qualifier with the quail. Is there a qualifying verse? So I went on a search to see if I could find something. This is brand new. This is not in any of our studies. Brand new, hot off the press. This is the only place you're going to see this. Here's Mark's qualifying verse in chapter 1, important chapter, chapter 1, verse 32. This is what Mark says, "At even," 3798, "when the sun did set." So Mark is qualifying that he's, even though we're using 3798, he is taking up the third definition for the word evening, "when the sun did set." "They brought unto him all that were diseased and them that were possessed with devils." Found that was very interesting. Actually, it's goosebumpy, and I was jumping for joy. Now, Mark uses this word even and eventide 6 times in his book. And if you go check, in every case, he's referring to talking about content and context. This is back to grammar. He is talking about dusk, which is after sunset. He is not talking about afternoon, because remember, 3798, the very first definition was afternoon.
Charlene?
Yes.
Can you go back to your last slide, please? Okay. I'm waiting for it to come up here. Okay, when it says here, "And now when the even was come, because it was the preparation." And we have just read the verse from Mark, which says that even that he identifies means when the sun had set. So is Mark telling us right here that after the sun had set, that it was still the preparation day? Is he telling us that the sunset did not change the day on this particular event?
Well, I'm going to pass the question to Mario.
That's very good observation, I think. I think that's a great observation that the sun setting did not change the day. It's still the same day. And it alludes to, and it was before the high Sabbath, which I think is unleavened bread, which begins the beginning of the next day, on the 15th of the next day. And so I'm going to say that it was the same day.
And I hope everybody that views this PowerPoint will agree, because it's very clear.
Thanks
It's a
for
good
bringing that up.
observation, Tim. I will change the slide to number 42, where we have Mark giving clarification in his very first chapter. It is not at the last chapter, it's in the very beginning. And you can see in this middle box here, in Mark chapter 1, chapter 4, chapter 6, chapter 11, chapter 14, and chapter 15. And in case you don't know, Mark only has 16 chapters. He has got this idea of the even, meaning after the sun has set, all through his book. Mark has done this for you. If you're not paying attention, you won't see it. So what I'm saying is that the scriptures are qualifying that Joseph received Yahusha's body at even after the sun had set. Remember, chapter 1 is not talking about Joseph getting the body. This is where Mark is laying down the principle that when he uses the word even, he's talking about the sun has set and it is evening. So if someone says to you that Yahusha was taken off the cross, he was all cleaned up and all ready to go and in the tomb before sunset, it is absolutely impossible, for one thing, to even get that burial done according to the custom of the Jews. It's impossible. And secondly, it is not possible according to Mark. So you just say to them, you haven't read Mark 1 verse 32 yet. Never mind all the other. That's why I'm saying the cross is the qualifier for a lot of calendar that we have found, everything we have found. But there is another verse to look at, and it's in Matthew 27. We've had this one already, but this time we're going to look at the Hebrew edition of Matthew. Yes, it has been found, and if Matthew is using Hebrew, then he's using Hebrew definitions. So let's take a look and see what Matthew 27 has to say in the Hebrew. This is verses 57 and 58. He says, and when the even was come, and we know in the Hebrew, this is 6153, Aibv. There came a rich man of Arimathea named Joseph, and he begged the body of Yahusha. In the Hebrew manuscript of Matthew, that word even is definitely 6153, and it links to the very first definition of Aibv, or dusk. And as Mark has said, this is after the sun has set. Matthew is very, very clear that he's using even as dusk. Dusk never ever happens before sunset. So thank you, Matthew, that we have a qualifier from the Hebrew. We're just going to do a partial summary for this word Aibv before we go on to the next part. Between the Hebrew and the Greek, the word evening or Aibv, it can maintain the meaning of the word day as the second definition when it is used with the phrase ben ha-arba'im, or between the evenings, in the Hebrew, or number 2, if there's a qualifying verse in the Greek. And we found that we had the qualifying verse in Mark chapter 1. Afternoon is also part of between the evenings, or ben ha-arba'im. And also, we're just doing a review, dusk and twilight belong to Aibv. We have our puppy dog. That means that we're going to be changing topics. So, will we find an Aibv mixing around the cross? Again, I'm saying that this is an important question because we will look at Yahusha's life. We're going to specifically examine the darkness of Yahusha's cross at the 6th hour. That is according to Yahweh's calendar. And my question is this: how did this unusual darkness arrive and how did it leave? And was Yahuwah bound by his own covenant of the day, including the placement of twilights. We discovered that he put those twilights in there between the day and the night as very special portions of the 24-hour cycle to guard our eyes from looking at the sun. We'll do more on that in a little bit. And who really does have the last word? I would like to look at the last two verses in the book of John, verses 24 and 25. And this is John the disciple, which testifieth of these things and wrote these things, and we know that his testimony is true. And he goes on to say, and there are also many other things which Yahusha did, the which, if they should be written every one, I suppose that even the world itself could not contain the books that should be written. And I'm here to tell you that if every possible thing about Yeshua's life, his ministry, his miracles, his healings, his death, his burial, resurrection, his ascension, his 40 days, if everything was written about him, everything he's said and did and thought, you would not be able to read all the books. That is why this is a puzzle and a riddle and a secret, because you have to look at the things that happened, not just the things that were said. So in this examination, we are looking at what happened, not just at what we can see. We're looking at the actions, not the nouns. And I'd like to tell you that there is ample evidence in several calendar studies that Yahusha has the last word around many uncertain issues regarding the calendar. And we are now beginning to understand that if there's any question at all, we need to go look at the Passion account, because that's where we're finding verification, looking at the end to verify the beginning. So the question is, will Yahusha have the last word on Aibv's definition when it comes to the second definition for the word day? That is our question here. But before going any further, there are some things that I would like you to ponder as we go through these next slides. There are questions and there are statements that really need to be considered and carefully thought about. And we need to know if everybody agrees or disagrees with general hermeneutic principles as found in our scriptures. And so we're just going to lay down a few of those hermeneutic principles right now. So when we're contemplating Yahuwah or Yahusha, I want you to ask yourself, do you agree or disagree, or are you not sure? And there's, I don't know, we have about 5 or 6 questions. My first one is, Yahuwah does not change. Do we agree or disagree, or we're not sure?
Agree.
Well, yes. When we look at Malachi 3:6, we had this little phrase, verse up on the screen, for I am Yahuwah, I change not. And Hebrews 13:8, Yahusha HaMashiach, the same yesterday and today and forever. So Yahuwah does not change. I hope we all agree on that. Here's the next question. Yahuwah does not lie. Do we agree or disagree with that?
We agree.
Well, you can look in. I wish we had our whole audience today. It would be a lot more fun. Numbers 23:19, right there in Torah, Yahuwah is not a man that he should lie. At the end of our scriptures in Titus 1:2, I love this verse, in hope of eternal life, which Yahuwah that cannot lie promised before the world began. Okay, number 3 question. Yahuwah will not break his covenant. Do we agree or disagree?
We agree.
Yahuwah will not break his It says in Psalms 89:34, my covenant will I not break, nor alter the thing that has gone out of my lips. We're going on to slide 49. We're still laying down some hermeneutic principles, and the question is still the same. Do you agree or disagree? Does Yahuwah have a covenant of the day and a covenant of the night? This is calendar questions. We've gone over the verse in Jeremiah 33, 25 to 26. Actually, there's a whole bunch of verses here, but let's look at these. Thus saith Yahweh, if my covenant be not with the day and the night, and if I have not appointed the ordinances of heaven and earth, then this is what happens. I will cast away the seed of Jacob and David my servant. That is serious. So his covenant of the day and the night is very serious. Question number 5. Does his covenant of the day and the night include 2 twilights? Do you agree or disagree?
We agree.
You better agree. Because Genesis 1:5, it says, and the evening, which is twilight, and the morning, which is twilight, came to be part of the first, and it's the first day season. So there's a covenant of the day and the night. On slide 50, our questions continue. Do we agree or disagree? In the covenant of the day and the night, is it impossible to travel from light to night or to travel from night to light without passing through a twilight first? Is that impossible?
Yes.
It's impossible.
Impossible.
It's impossible. Yes. Yahuwah said so because 6 times in the creation week he said that there was a twilight. 6 times it is there written there. But Moses has some additional instructions that we really do need to pay attention to. Prophet Moses was really an awesome person. And I'm here to tell you that he got everything written down in the Torah that we absolutely need to know, and he also wrote it down in order. He didn't make any mistakes whatsoever. He has given us 2 very important commands in Deuteronomy, and I want to read these verses. The first one is in Deuteronomy 4, verses 14 to 19 and 23. Actually, I think I'm going to have Tim read these next couple slides.
And Yahuwah commanded me, Moshe, at that time to teach you statutes and judgments, that ye might do them in the land whither ye go over to possess it. 15. Take ye therefore good heed unto yourselves. 16. Lest ye corrupt yourselves and make you a graven image, the similitude of any figure, the likeness of male or female, of any beast, of any winged fowl, of anything that creepeth on the ground, of any fish that is in the waters beneath the earth. And lest thou lift up thine eyes unto heaven, and when thou seest the sun, and the moon, and the stars, even all the host of heaven, shouldst be driven to worship them and serve them. Take heed unto yourselves, lest ye forget the covenant of Yahuwah our Elohim, and make you a graven image, or the likeness of anything which Yahuwah thy Elohim hath forbidden thee.
It sounds pretty clear about what you're supposed to be looking at and what you're not supposed to be looking at. So we have decided that the twilights are a safeguard. Yahuwah has been so kind to put those twilights between the day season and the night season so that there would be absolutely no chance of our eyes looking to the sun or the moon and having the temptation of following those lights to blend them into our worship calendars. He has put the safeguard in there. So Timothy, would you continue reading our slide for us?
The twilight safeguard, number 2. Deuteronomy 17, 2-5. If there be found among you man or woman that hath wrought wickedness in the sight of Yahuwah thy Elohim, in transgressing his covenant, and hath gone and served other gods, and worshipped them, either the sun or moon, or any of the host of heaven, which I have not commanded. And it be told thee, and thou hast heard of it, and inquired diligently, and behold, it be true, that such abomination is wrought in Israel. Then shalt thou bring forth that man or that woman which have committed the wicked thing unto thy gates, and thou shalt stone them with stones till they die. Pretty serious.
Yes, so in Deuteronomy chapter 4, the warning is don't look to the sun, the moon. It's actually including every light in the sky. Planets are lights as well, stars. The moon has reflected light from the sun. In the first one, he's saying don't even look. In this one, he's talking now about worship. So Yahuwah knew that there was going to, worship was of these created bodies was going to happen if they started gazing at these sun and moon and stars. He knew what was going to happen. The penalty was death by stoning. So it was serious.
Charlene?
Yes.
I'd like to add that I don't believe there's anything wrong with observing the phases of the moon, the actions of the moon, the beautiful light that is reflected by the moon. I think that Yahuwah made the moon, and it is his creation, and we should be looking at it as an incredible creation, but we should be giving the credit and all allegiance to Yahuwah for what he did in creating it. Now, there's the question of worshiping the moon or worshiping the sun. From my understanding, if Yahuwah has given us, and I believe he has given us a different system of determining time, and that is by the Tekufa, if we take the system of looking to the moon for determining time, as in a new year day and a new month day, if we take that system and we give our allegiance to that system of determining time, other than what the Tekufa, which is written in the scriptures, if we give our allegiance to the moon, we are in effect worshiping the moon by giving our allegiance to that. No, we don't have to be on our knees bowing down to the moon or raising our hands in the air to the moon. It is, from what I understand, it's the allegiance, what we allow ourselves to be guided by, directed by. And we need to give that allegiance to Yahuwah and no other place. Mario, what do you have?
Yeah, I wanted to add to what you were saying too, in my simple words, because I am a simple guy, kind of guy. I agree with you that looking at the creation, the marvelous wonders that he has given to us is a healthy thing when we acknowledge that he created it all. I love looking at flowers and plants and gardens and all that, but I don't go to them to ask them, when do I begin to do something? You know, I'm not looking at them to tell me when I can and when something begins and when something ends. When I look at my watch to see what time it is, although nowadays we all have cell phones, we can look at the time on there, not using watches quite so much, but we can, you know, use it as a tool, but not for it to tell me when I should and shouldn't do something. That, I think, is a type of worship.
Yes, I'm in full agreement. And when we say that the scriptures use the Tekufa as determining time, the Tekufa is built up of several different identities. There's the earth from where we look at it. There's the Matzeroth from where the sun is placed, and the sun orb itself, and also the light. And it's actually the light that we are to be looking at, and what we are to be guided by is light. Yahuwah has, just as Charlene pointed out, Yahuwah has built in the twilights to as the beginning of the time of the day to take us away as a protection against us from looking to the sun for the start of the day. So that is a lesson in itself. We are to look to the light and the light only for our guidance. Charlene?
And I'm really, really glad that both of you have given us those comments, and I should probably have an extra slide in there. You know, that there's nothing wrong at looking at the moon. It is beautiful when it's full. I admire it myself, you know, especially in the wintertime. It's just sparkly out there. But what Moses is trying to tell us in Deuteronomy 4 is don't look to them, and then in Deuteronomy 17, lest you worship. So we have to put the two together. It's about getting pulled in to following the pagan ways of worshiping these heavenly bodies in order to incorporate a worship calendar. If you want to call me up and say the moon is gorgeous here in Texas tonight or Arizona, you go right ahead. I'll tell you what I have.
Yeah, they say
Yeah.
that Arizona's sunrises and sunset are only second to the Philippines. I've never been really paying attention to the sunrises or sunsets in the Philippines, but I can contest that Arizona does have some beautiful sunsets and sunrises. But I wanted to point out too that you had brought up in some previous slides about his covenant, you know, between the day and the night, and it's impossible for Yahuwah to break his covenant because he said so. He said that he wouldn't break it. We can screw things up, but he is not going to break it. When we see the rainbow in the sky, we should be reminded of his covenant. When we see the Tekufa and the light, we should be reminded of, you know, likewise of his covenant of the day and the night. And so it's not to worship the Tekufa either, but to recognize and adore the covenant that he's given to us.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. And the first day of creation has a very important covenant. It's a calendar covenant on the very first day. Yes, on day 6 we have the covenant of marriage. On day 7 we have the covenant of the Sabbath. Those are beautiful covenants. We found other covenants in the creation week, but on the first day it's the covenant of the day and the night. And because it's first, I think it's really important.
Thank you, Mario, for mentioning about the rainbow. I never thought of that. That covenant is pure light. There is nothing else. That is pure light. I love it.
And so it's always good to be brainstorming and asking questions, because especially when it comes to calendar, I'm sure every other topic in the scripture as well, but when it comes to calendar, to start asking these questions and brainstorming, you will just find that you will be on a search, on a bunny trail. Anyway, there's something interesting to take note of about these commands in Deuteronomy 4 and 17 that Moses gave to us. They are not found in the 613 commands that are to be upheld with Torah as Torah truth. We all have heard about the 613 laws, and you have to keep them all. And you know, this comes from the Messianics and the Hebrew roots and whatnot. And we had a lady in our feast last year that said she went and looked at these 613 commands to see if Deuteronomy 4 and 17 are there. And she couldn't find them. And she thought that was interesting. I'm glad she went and took a peek. But my question is, why not? Why are these two commands of Moses not in the 613? Because we are told that those 613, we need to be in obedience to all of them.
Charlene, if those commands to not look to the moon and not give your allegiance to the moon were included in those 613 mitzvot, would that present a problem to the Hebrew calendar, which is guided by the moon, which looks to the moon for the new years and the new month day? Would those verses from Deuteronomy that we just looked at, instructing us not to look to the moon, would that present a problem?
Well, it sure would for me if I was in their boots. I just think that there's a lot of picking and choosing that has happened in the Torah, And as much as I have heard that, you know, the Messianics or Hebrew roots or feast keepers or whoever that are using sun and moon in their calendar, I'm sure they're very, very sincere. They probably don't know this information yet, but they also don't recognize that they've been doing some picking and choosing, and we are not allowed to do that in the scriptures.
I want to point out too that those 613 commands are predominantly Judaism, not necessarily the word of Yahuwah. In these commands, you're commanded not to speak his name either. So, I mean, there's some stuff in here that really shouldn't be part of in here, and there's a bunch of stuff that he does command us to do that's not in here, and a lot of the stuff that's in here is duplicated repeats of just rewording it based on Rabbi so and so. So I'm not even sure about this stuff. Not saying that we can't glean some good stuff from it, just might want to give it some second thought.
Yes, yes, and you should know what's in there to see if you can, if you know what's in there, then you can go and check it with the scripture, but if you don't know what they're talking about, then you don't know. Right. And I have gone and looked too, and many of those commands are repeated, not just twice, but 2 and 3 and 4 times more than they need to be. I don't know, I guess 613 is the wonderful number. We're not going to go into this part of the study too much today. We will be covering this in calendar studies coming up. But just in a nutshell, to ask this question, why not are these 2 commands of Moses in the 613? The Jews cannot include these commands of Moses because their feast worship calendar is firmly connected to, number 1, observing the sunset commencement for Yahuwah's Sabbaths and feast Sabbaths and festivals. And number 2, they're citing the moon for their calendar months. Both were some of the traditions that they eagerly brought back from Babylon. That is a huge study in history. And I might just add here, it's not just the Jews or the Messianic roots. Hebrew roots, most of the feast keepers that we know that are not connected to Jewishness really in any way, they're observing the sunset and the moon as well. But Moses prophesied that Yahweh's people would run after other gods when he died, and that is exactly what happened. That is why he gave those commands in the first place. And like I said, eventually this piece of history is going to be covered in calendar studies as we go along. It's very interesting history. But we want to get back to the cross because we've been talking about this darkness around the cross. Now, we know that the twilights are a safeguard, so we do not transgress the command of Moses by looking to the sun to determine day start. Okay, we're talking about worship statutes here. And we also know that the day season cannot begin until the twilight component arrives first. The twilight is what ushers in the day season, the day where you have your sun in the sky. That means that Yahuwah's components of light and darkness always linked to a mixing transition that separates the light and the night, the light season from the night season. That's an important concept. So here's the question. What happened at the cross at the 6th hour and the 9th hour? Let's go take a look. I just want to give a little bit about the synoptic gospel writers of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Again, John does not record any details around the cross for the 6th and the 9th hour. He looked at Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and he said, they've got it all right. I don't have to fix up any problems there. So you will not find a record in the book of John. I went to Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and I took the scriptures, and I've compiled their details just into one nice basic reading verse, and we'll do that on the next slide. But I do want you to know that Mark always gives a little extra detail that is very interesting. We saw that in Mark chapter 1 when he declares when the even actually is. So what I've done on this slide is The blue has come from Matthew, the green has come from Mark, and the red has come from Luke. And some of them do dovetail and do both, right? But this is what you'll find for around the cross. And when the 6th hour was come, there was darkness over the whole land, and then Luke tells you, and over all the earth. He adds that piece of detail. And the sun was darkened until the 9th hour. At the 9th hour, Yahusha cried with a loud voice, saying, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which is being interpreted, my El, why hast thou forsaken me? And when Yahusha had cried with a loud voice, he said, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. And having said thus, he gave up the Ruach. And behold, the veil of the temple was rent in twain from the top to the bottom, and the earth did quake, and the rocks did rent. That's basically what you'll get out of those 3 portions of Scripture when you put all the verses together. So now I have a question or two. At the 6th hour, did the daylight transition to darkness in an instant? Or did Yahuwah honor his covenant by placing an Aibv mixing between the light and the darkness at the 6th hour? That is the first question. Let's look at the second question. At the 9th hour, did the darkness around the cross transition to daylight in an instant when the earth did quake at Yeshua's death? Or did Yahuwah honor his covenant, placing an Aibv mixing at the 9th hour between the darkness and the light? These are really important questions that we need to ask because of his covenant that he gave and that he spoke. Have you ever wondered what it would have been like to be at the cross that day, to see these extraordinary things? In Luke 5:26, it says this, do you think, and I'm asking you, do you think the people said, again, we have seen remarkable things today? Well, Luke 5 is not talking about the cross. It's talking about something else. But I'm just wondering at the cross if they didn't say, we have seen extraordinary things today. Extraordinary things.
Yeah, they were probably freaking out a little bit that day.
So here's the question. How did the light around the cross transition straight to darkness at noon and then straight back to the light at the 9th hour? Well, I think this is big news. I think it happened all according to Yahuwah's covenant, that there were 2 Aibv transitions on that day. Actually, I need to change that. There was more than 2. How many Aibv transitions were on that day? We're going to look at this because there was extra 2, not just 2, extra 2.
4, cuatro.
You know, I
yes, we're going to.
This had just now come to my mind, something to think about. You know, Moses was inquired about those that were unclean to honor the Pesach, right? And Yah made a provision for those that were dirty, unclean for whatever reason, carrying dead bodies or, you know, whatever, that they could honor the Pesach that following month. Yeah, well, you know, praise Yah, we can come to him any day of the week now. But the point being is that adding those 2 is like adding another opportunity or another month. It just kind of, I don't know, popped in my head there.
Tim and I like to see people thinking outside the box because we recognize how important that is. And we also believe there is not one question that is a stupid question or a silly question or immature. Every one of the questions are very, very important, and all the comments are as well. So I'm just Tim?
No, go ahead. I was just doing a thumbs up to your comments that yes, we want questions, we want answers, we want to think, we want to hear what people think, what you are convicted of, what, you know, are your questions, because we learn from those questions.
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking that it's a possible another shadow picture of another blessing that he's, you know, given to us. But anyway, okay.
Yes. And I want to say too, Mario, you have added so much to our understanding just since we've been doing calendar studies. So we really appreciate you being such a wonderful host. But is there actually a new fact about a rev that we're going to discover? Remember in part 1, we had the understanding that the only time when indirect sunlight could be seen in the 24-hour cycle is either before sunrise or after sunset. However, here is the qualification. When there is divine intervention, the mixing of light and darkness did occur during the daylight hours, before the 6th hour, which was at noon, and after the 9th hour of the cross. I hope that you've picked that up so far. So we're going to chart what actually happened on Aibv 14 on that extraordinary day of Passover at the cross to fulfill the second definition of a reb for day. Second definition was day. So here's a chart. We're going to look at it. We're starting out on the 14th of the month. That's Passover day. We have our twilight with our sunrise coming in and ushering in the day season. We have the cross at the 3rd hour. At the 6th hour, we have a rev mixing. Then it goes on to darkness. At the 9th hour, we have another rev mixing. When Yahusha said, "It is finished," another rev mixing has to come into the picture before you can actually have the rest of the day season. Sunset comes along and ushers in the dusk. Now, when you see this yellow bracket down here, this is the part that is considered between the evenings or between the mixings, or in Hebrew, ben ha-arba'im. This is between the dawn mixing and the dusk mixing. That is the time of between the mixing. Of course, the cross is right there from the 3rd hour to the 9th hour. What do we have at the cross? Oh my, we have 2 extra mixings placed right between the evenings. 2 of them, one at the 6th hour, one at the 9th hour. Why? Because Yahuwah cannot break his covenant. When you go from light to darkness, there has to be a mixing. That's why we have 2 extra arevs of light mixed with darkness at the noon and the 9th hour. 2 extra ones. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. Wow. Extraordinary things. After the sunset and the dusk, Aibv 14 continues on with its night season. Then you have your Aibv 15, your unleavened bread Sabbath, begins with the morning twilight. Sunrise comes along to give you your day season. So what do we find? You can know the end from the beginning. In the last hours of Yahusha's life, he fulfills the Arev day definition. Your Arevs at 6th hour and 9th hour.
Charlene?
Yes.
I'd like to read a verse from Genesis 8, verse 22. This is after the flood. This is to reinforce the covenant of the day. This is, I'll just read it. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. There is the perfect outline of this covenant. And right here we just saw the covenant of the day. The day has to have the twilight mixtures to introduce the day. And here we see when the darkness come along, it had to have that twilight mixture to introduce the darkness at the 6th hour, and it had to have the twilight mixture to introduce the light that come again at the 9th hour to finish out between the Ben RBM, between the larger evenings. There's the covenant written in the scripture, clear as a bell.
Amen. Isn't it interesting too that right after that, the very next verse says, "Be fruitful, multiply, and replenish." Under this new season, this new time.
Yes. And at the same time, we have the rainbow in the sky with added covenant. And I think what I'll do, Mario, before we build the PowerPoint into the PDF, I'm going to add that verse onto this slide. I think it's excellent. I just want to make a mention here about problems that Tim and I have had to wrestle with the definitions of the word evening when it came to this second definition of day. You know, iron sharpens iron. And, you know, the question came up, there is no way that the word day can be a definition for evening, because that came out of Mr. Strong's concordance. And Mr. Strong has a lot of problems in his concordance, and we already know that. And so that just cannot be. That's just written in a book that was written by man. We had to wrestle with this. And that's when the search went. And, you know, we discovered the quail there. Everybody, this is the second witness. There might be others that we haven't found, but the cross today in this study is the second witness that there can be a rev mixings in the day. And that is in Yahusha's death. Really, 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 that was an extraordinary day. Absolutely.
And that is also a very, very strong witness to when Yahusha says that he will give you light for those that are searching. When they search with all their heart, they're doing their due diligence. Yahuwah will show you. He will reveal to you what you are searching for. That is his promise, and that was fulfilled with those exact words that Charlene just talked about.
Yes, and Tim, well, just a second, Mario. Tim, I would like you to look up Jeremiah 33:3 and read that after Mario's comment.
I was just thinking, this kind of came in my head, and as things usually do, they pop in, and sometimes they take residence in there, and sometimes they pop in just long enough to pop out. But I was just thinking just now about one of the ways that we look at the new season or the new year is by something that happened in the middle of the day on this day. Did that make sense what I just said? Because at the beginning of the year, we see that there was a shadow, that there's something that changed from that year to a new season, a new time. Here we see in the middle of the day something that, you know, similar, a shadow, a darkness, something that changed from one season to a new season. It's just like, whew, I'm just getting little goosebumps over here. But I don't know. I just think like that, I guess. So, just a thought.
We love the thoughts. That's why you're valuable, Mario.
Praise Yah. Hallelujah.
Okay, Charlene, you wanted me to read Jeremiah 33, verse 3?
Yes, I think that's the one.
Call to me, and I will answer you. Does that sound like a promise? And I will tell you. Another promise. Great and mighty things which you do not know. So if we are searching, if we do not have an answer, but it is in our heart that we need that answer, that we desire it with all our heart. And if we are doing our due diligence, if we are searching the scriptures, precept upon precept, here little, there little, if we do that work, Yahuwah has given us promise. Call to me and I will answer you, and I will tell you great and mighty things which you do not know. Fabulous.
Great
Absolutely.
is thy faithfulness.
Yes. We had the comment the first time we did this that someone mentioned that we need to pray for forgiveness for not understanding calendar. I do not see it that way. I see that in our ignorance we were worshiping Yahweh the best that we knew and understood how, and that he has winked at our ignorance. He understands the controversy that calendar has been for many, many decades. But I will say that if you're seeing this information and you turn away from it, that's a little more serious. Then you need to consider carefully. But in your ignorance, I do not believe it has been sin. As we are learning and understanding and we come into covenant with him, he will send the blessings and he will teach us what we all need to know. Okay, I think we're ready to go on to number 64. Extraordinary Erebs. This was an extraordinary day. The earth quaked at the 9th hour. That was the moment that Yahusha laid down his life. And next, the twilight is ushered in, which in turn escorts in the last part of the afternoon light. And so you have 3 hours of darkness that would have been ushered in and out by 2 twilights, because Yahuwah cannot break his covenant of the day. These twilights are still the same mixing of light and darkness as defined by Aibv. And at the cross, there is an Aibv at noon, and there's an Aibv at the 9th hour. They're both positioned during the day season hours, where there is normally no mixing of light and darkness. I said normally. Therefore, these Aibvs did occur during the day season because of divine intervention. That's your big if right there. So this Aibv mixing around the cross definitely was of divine intervention, and it was put there to get the attention of everybody. Remember, the synoptic gospel writer said the whole earth. It wasn't just around the cross. The whole earth went dark. So Yeshua's cross explains an interesting truth about Aibv. The unusual darkness of Aibv 14 arrived and it left with these Aibv boundaries. And Yahuwah honored his covenant of the day, placing Aibv mixings before and after the noonday darkness. And I'm saying that's when the lights came on for us. So wonderful, wonderful, extraordinary things that we are taught. Aibv 14, we started with the light in the morning. Then there was darkness at noon until the 9th hour. And then we had the afternoon light. And for Yahuwah to honor his covenants of the day and the night, he has no choice. He has to include the mixings to transition from light to darkness and darkness to light at the cross. He has absolutely no choice because of his covenant. Let's do a little review. Number one review. Evening or Aibv rightly claims the first definition as dusk, which is the mixing of light and night. And number 2, evening or Aibv can only claim the second definition of day or no mixing when it's linked to a qualifier. Okay, we did that with the quail and the manna. Now, one more question. At the cross, did evening Aibv rightfully claim its first definition of a mixing of light and darkness? Yes, but the time frame picked up the second definition of day because it happened in the middle of a day. And that was only by divine intervention. So it had the mixing of dusk, not as the dusk after sunset, but as the Aibv. This is the verb action of the mixing, not the noun of the dusk after sunset. I hope we can make that clear. Tim, do you have anything to add?
You're doing
All is good. We don't have many slides left. The cross indeed has the last word to show the mixing of light and darkness during the midday hours. Once again, wonderful news, the cross has the last word. Our final summary for Aibv. We're doing lots of review here so you can get it. Between Hebrew and Greek, evening can maintain the meaning of the word day as a second definition when it's used with ben ha RBM in Hebrew or with the qualifying verse in Greek like we had in Mark 1. Afternoon is part of between the evenings because afternoon is between sunrise and sunset. And the dusk twilight belongs to the Aibv. Okay, that's your noun. Number 2, the word Aibv as a mixing of light and darkness, or your verb, can also take place during the daylight hours, but only by divine intervention as it was at the cross. And I have a feeling we might see something of this sort happen in the very last days of the Earth's history when it comes to prophecy and different things that are happening with the plagues, the trumpet plagues and the very last plagues. I believe we'll see these things happen again. So I'm maintaining to keep your studies simple. You can do this with your Bible, with an exhaustive concordance and some good study skills. And I think you'll be able to answer most calendar challenges easily, even if you don't have Parkhurst's lexicon from 1600s or 1700s. I think we can all do this if we just massage those pages from cover to cover. And Yahuwah will bless us abundantly like he has promised in Jeremiah 33:3. In the next covenant calendar study, Tim would like to do a full examination of the creation week. We're going to be adding in what actually happened in verses 1 and 2 of Genesis 1. 1 and 2 are absolutely the foundation brick for the whole covenant study on calendar. So I just hope that you soar to higher heights as you learn to study. So that is the end of this presentation today.